right, we should be ready to rock and roll here. Very excited to have a uh, an expert here from Griffin Resources, Michelle Griffin, and we're going to talk a bit today about a topic that I think we can all relate to. Burnout isn't a badge of honor. Um, it's funny when I will interview for new technicians, I'll bring somebody in that's never worked in a managed environment and they've always worked in a corporate environment, and it's always interesting how uh, they're not prepared always. Like you start asking questions about, the fast-paced environment that we work in, bouncing back and forth from one client to another client, from, one server outage to whatever the fire is. It's a constant battle, and it does take a certain mindset to be able to work in a managed environment like we have. And that is exactly what Michelle is going to talk about today.
Yeah, I
And
think also if they come out of corporate, getting them to put their time in is a challenge because they're
oh
not used to
yeah,
having to do that.
yeah, no, 100% Jay. I mean, that totally is true because um, you would think that in a corporate environment that there would be policies and procedures, but from what I have found, it's very haphazard, far from yeah, very haphazard.
Hmm.
So, Michelle, I'm going to turn things over to you, and you can give your intro for those that might not be familiar with you and Griffin Resources, and we'll just jump right into our content.
Cool. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I am Dr. Michelle Griffin, and I was the head of HR at ConnectWise. So that is kind of my knowledge when it comes to IT and MSPs. I started Griffin Resources about 6 years ago. It's essentially an HR department that is fractioned out to small to mid-sized businesses. So we provide ongoing HR, payroll, and recruiting support for many different types of industries, including the tech world and MSPs. So I've kind of kept a kind of a pulse on the world a little bit when it comes to that particular industry. And so I kind of wanted to obviously talk to you from an angle of a couple different sides of burnout, of more of the practical application of it, and less of like the fluffy HR side of it. So we can certainly kind of go over any kind of question. So feel free to jump right in when you have questions. If I can get it to switch screens, there we go. Um, so I kind of wanted to talk kind of like what Dan was saying, like the always on culture that obviously doesn't necessarily happen in the corporate side of things. And obviously, if there's outages and nights, weekends, and stuff like that, there's typically the need for that. But usually, the MSPs are the ones that have to handle that unless a company is big enough to have their own IT. So that's something that is not typical in other industries and things like that. And there's specific challenges that come with that. So obviously, it's everything from the outages to cyber attacks, server failures, and things like that. And it typically, obviously, comes from some kind of internal. I would say I don't know if it's all the time, but typically, what I've seen from the HR side is there's some kind of failure that happened on an employee side, like they clicked on something that they weren't supposed to. They weren't using the VPN or something like that. So it comes with a lot of education with employees on cybersecurity and managing all of the issues that come with all the different types of employees that the MSP is going to be supporting, and making sure that those people are educated and reducing those risks. And so you don't have the same kind of control over all the clients and all the education that they should have, but you have to deal with all of their messes. So I think that's also another like just issue that comes with handling so many different types of clients and the different levels of industries and things like that, depending if your MSP is focused on a particular industry or not. Um, and obviously the actual issues that come with that from an individual perspective is obviously fatigue and, sleep disruption, loss of focus. And if they're not used to that at all, and really kind of just having to be either on call or that just relentless pressure of that type of culture of always being on can lead to burnout. And burnout is obviously just more than just stress or, a particular short-term type of fatigue. It's something that can be longer lasting and causing, it can cause mental health issues. It can cause issues with the person, but also for the company, because then you're dealing with customer service issues. Again, they're not clocking things correctly. You may not be billing things correctly. And so it definitely leads to some issues and impact on the company itself. I kind of wanted to
I wanted to
go ahead.
jump in here and just make a comment
Yeah.
too. I think it's so critical for us to, have a good understanding of um, what's going on in the lives of, from a work perspective, of our employees. Because, I've had technicians over the years that, you know, have come to me and said, Dan, I just not sure I can handle the stress. Through conversation, we figure out what we can do to make things better. But we don't want it to get to a point where they're pulling their hair out and they're ready to leave, right? Or their quality of work diminishes. I remember one particular technician, he says, Dan, look at how much weight I've lost since I've been working in this role. And so those are things that we need to keep an eye on. We are all small organizations. um, we're not big empires where you're a number. So it is much more of a personal, family type oriented, environment that we all have. And we just need to have our, finger on the pulse of our teams, and, don't wait too long to address it.
Yeah. And, this kind of talks about like where that stress comes from. And part of identifying like how to solve it is kind of knowing what is going to be causing those stress. A lot of it is that mental toll of that constant switching, like you mentioned also in the beginning about just the different types of clients, different types of environments, different types of, issues, and you're constantly having to switch between clients and issues and keeping all the information straight and, tackling all of the challenges sometimes, in a multi-tasking environment, and sometimes you can handle them one at a time depending on, the demand that you have on the individual. So, you know, the the difference between obviously just the corporate versus MSP is, one that definitely has to be not only explained, but sometimes they just don't know what it's going to feel like until they get into it. And having to just juggle with those different setups, and each client's going to have their different hardware configuration, different cloud services, security protocols, and things like that. That's going to always just constantly be a cause for concern if there's not a good way to manage the stress of that. And so being understanding of what that looks like and how many clients a certain engineer can handle. So being able to really, some people may be able to handle more or less depending on, how many years of experience and things like that. But, they have to handle not only just the tech side of things, but the human aspect side of things. So like, however many clients they have and how many points of contact they have within that client, they have to manage all of those, their stresses and, have really difficult conversations on a regular basis, which is, obviously just a lot of issues can come from that too, including something called decision fatigue. They have to obviously be making, fast-paced decisions, and they have to think quickly on their feet while having difficult conversations, while managing emotional intelligence of themselves, the people around them. It's much more of a difficult job, and identifying the right talent to do those kinds of workloads and things like that is important to identify and make sure it's the type of workload that the people can go into. So if you're hiring the right talent from the beginning, but also managing that along the way, and knowing when there's just too many clients or too many expectations, and how to help manage that if there's ways to work within team environments, or however you may be able to manage some of that, so you're not leading to constant turnover or engineers struggling to meet the demand that's being put on them. So some of the Signs and symptoms, obviously, is they literally stop being productive, and they can't be proactive at putting out fires. They're always constantly, just having to be reactive to everything. The ticket qualities can suffer, and they end up. We saw this at ConnectWise too, where our like level 4 techs would just solve the issue of the ticket, but they wouldn't actually put in the information to solve the baseline coding, so that wouldn't happen again, and that we would be able to solve it with updates and things like that too. So they were just starting to get to the point where they would just put band-aids on things, and we weren't actually solving the tech issues from the root causes. I had to write people up for that. So it was, so those are some of the things where like you'll start to see, just constant, issues that might be happening through, it could be solved instead through, thoughtful troubleshooting. Explain how it leads to more, just the escalation due to the bandwidth constraints and things like that, and what that means. And so being able to have those kinds of conversations with them and get them to open up and kind of, let them know when you're starting to see some, issues within the company, and how they can change and work together on reducing some of that stress for them. And obviously, like, you don't want to lead to absenteeisms and turnovers and things like that. And I'm sure you guys have seen some of those types of things in your past, as far as like actual like symptoms of what happens when people are like literally in burnout and stop caring as much about the client or their work product. So, really having an impact on the business, obviously, kind of like beating this point to death, but, really you don't want to get to the point to where it also turns into client dissatisfaction and you start losing clients, not necessarily your people, but, and obviously that's expensive too with recruiting and turnover costs, but, not producing the right answers to your clients, or, you're not supporting them in a timely fashion. Like they said, everything is an emergency all the time, and being able to communicate to them, what deadlines to expect and set expectations with them, and helping your team members knowing how to set those expectations and meet. You don't want to over promise and under deliver kind of situations. So those are all kinds of, you don't want to get to the point where you're having situations with your clientele as well. Because obviously all of that is issues with the costs of obviously running business, but you don't want to get to the point where, those hidden costs of overworked employees that are cutting corners, exposing the business to security issues, legal compliance risks, things like that could start to really cause a problem for the business itself.
I want to throw another thing out here too is, and you maybe you're covering this later, and we can address it at another point. But we often feel as if okay, we're adding more business, but we've added enough, where it's like, well, we could use a part-time person or a quarter-time person, but not enough for a full-time person. Let's say there's 4 techs, and then really you could use 4 1/4 techs or 4 1/2 techs, but you're not going to hire necessarily a part-timer. You want a full-timer, and so you keep pushing it and pushing it and pushing it, and that's where that stress comes in. And we have to have a good understanding of what new business is coming in, staying on track of generating new business so we can bring in that 5th technician. So we're
Mm-hmm.
not putting so much extra burden on those existing 4 and causing them stress. And sometimes there is a ramp up period. We don't want to wait till we have
Mm-hmm.
all the work for that 5th person. There is a build up period that we have to make an investment, and they might not be as busy as they need to be in the beginning, but as you continue to drive new business, they will get busier, and that's just the right way to handle that.
Yeah, and that's actually what this next part is about, is like the real world solutions, and not focusing on like, the fluffy wellness side of HR. Is more like people respond better when they know you understand what they're going through, and they will end up being more loyal when you help solve the real life problems that they're facing, not just saying, well, here's a employee assistance program and here's some, wellness, you know,
Yeah,
talks for you and things like that. That doesn't solve the problem. So,
right.
understanding what needs to happen in the business is where you really want to start and make sure that they know that that's what you're working on. It's kind of similar in what I've built for my company. Everything we do is fractional. So I have a lot of part-time employees. A lot of them want to be part-time, and then we have to start them part-time and then ramp them up to full-time. And that has taken us a few years, to be honest, of recruiting to get our environment known and how do we explain that in a way that isn't misleading when it's in the recruiting process. And there has been sometimes, depending on where they're working in the business, if they start as a contractor and then move their way into employment. And so obviously it depends on your liability and what they're working on. If you can handle the liability of a contractor versus a direct employee. But some of those things where it's like, if it's something where they can kind of start to ramp up slow and introducing them, to the training and ramping them up in a way that you can afford it, because that's the other thing is you don't want to promise a salary and pay someone that, that are not revenue generating. And then you're paying for overhead that, you really can't afford, which is also kind of like similar to my environment. I can't do that either. I need to be paying them, billable time with, obviously I pay them the training and things like that, but I need them billable like as soon as possible. So it took us a little while to make sure that, we were explaining that correctly. We, had a really structured training process and standardized quite a bit of what we could. And so, this is kind of like what the slide's about, is kind of just really making sure that, there's ways to standardize your processes and, building that buffer zone, which is kind of, exactly what Dan was saying, making sure that you are either rotating the staff if you can, so they're cross-trained if they have to be on the front lines versus, kind of tech and that kind of stuff too. Or, making sure that they're very aware if they're overworked, because you just have to put it on them until you can bring in someone new, that you're voicing that and you let them know you're bringing someone in to relieve them soon, because then that way they know what to expect and they know it's not a forever situation, that there's a light at the end of the tunnel,
Yeah.
so to
No, I
speak.
think that's a key point because if they have no clue of what's going on and they feel like you're just trying to squeeze as much life out of them as possible, that's where they're going to start becoming dissatisfied with their job, and that's when they're going to start looking and they say, you know what, this isn't worth it. But like you just said, I mean, if they have an understanding of what your plan is, what the plan of attack is, they're going to breathe a sigh of relief in that regard.
Hmm.
My accountant
Yeah.
taught
And
me like probably 20 something years ago to always have extra capacity. You don't want people sitting around doing nothing all day,
Right.
but you want
mhm.
extra capacity so they're not burnt out.
Yeah, and think about too, like in our roles, there's always some kind of projects that we have as MSPs that we want to do to allow us to be more efficient at what we do. Maybe allow us to be more proactive in what we do. But because often we're putting out fires, there isn't time to be as proactive as we really should be. And if you do bring somebody on, and they aren't going to be overloaded or at capacity or near capacity, well, there's plenty of projects that we can give to them, things that we've always had on the back burner and we can accomplish.
Right. And that kind of goes into obviously a lot of the communication too, and just setting clear boundaries, not only with the employees, but helping them to set boundaries with the clients for themselves. So it does take, like I mentioned before, the difficult conversations. So there can be some training with how to handle the clients, but also kind of that sets up your culture as well, of making sure that everyone is very aware of what is considered an urgent ticket and how to what's going to disrupt or interrupt their normal workflow and things like that, defining what's considered an escalation, if there's a path of escalation and things like that too, so that the issues get to the right person and no one person is particularly overloaded, so that you can, kind of help them. Essentially what this one is like, ticket triage and things like that. So there's processes and procedures that that you can look into putting in place so that you can kind of balance out the workload and things like that too, if that's possible. A lot of it comes down to, I think, training the clients too, and communicate, obviously clear communication so everyone knows what's going on and when and how things are getting handled, to reduce pressure on the engineers and create realistic expectations with the clients, so that they don't feel like you just drop the ball and that kind of thing too. A lot of times we would see just responding and letting them know exactly where things are at versus having an automated response just saying your ticket's been received kind of thing. So those are some of the things that I feel like even we have to do in what we do is, kind of making sure people are answering emails and just responding to clients timely and things like that. So they don't feel like they're being misheard or whatever. So it really is a very interesting balance when it comes to not only their individual workload, but if there's something they can do to help each other out as teams, depending on how you can set up your workloads for them. And then obviously being really clear with the clients, because you don't want to create some kind of escalation point and they think someone else is going to answer the ticket. And then you have a he said, she said of whose responsibility it was. One person thinks they're going to answer the client and get back to the ticket, and the other one, that kind of thing, and it doesn't. So there's obviously a lot of processes and procedures and that kind of thing to help out, depending on obviously your client load and how many you have versus how many team members, if you get to the point of, 2, 3 kind of engineers. So that was, I mean, I had kind of a short presentation because a lot of it was, really talking about real solutions and making sure that and obviously it's going to be unique to your business. And that's why I couldn't go too far into depth about too much individual things, but I want to leave a lot of time to talk about this issue and kind of bring up some real solution or real problems you guys are having. And we can kind of talk through and have a lot of time to talk through some real situations you guys are going through, because burnout, obviously it's a real business issue and a risk. And so I wanted to leave time to really talk through that.
Yeah, I think
absolutely.
another point would be to, like I said before, have extra capacity, because it'd be even worse to wait until everyone is, bogged down to bring someone on, and then takes more time out of their day. They're trying to get the work done, plus train somebody and bring them up to speed. That's even worse.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah, I remember early on, my model was working till I was doing 120% and then bringing somebody on, and then they were like 100% utilized day one. And then I was talking to Ray Orsini, and he's like, no, man, like we keep people at 80% because like there's vacations, things happen,
Mhm.
if you're at 100 or 120% and then something happens, there's no way you're getting it done.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So I got a question for Michelle. Um, you chose burnout to talk about today. Um, is that, if you were to think about the top 3 things that come to you as an HR professional in our industry, is that something that is at the top of the list, or is that something that leads to the other issues that get
It's
brought to
the
you?
other issues, and burnout tends to be the problem. So a lot of times what comes to us is the behavioral issues that happen with that. They're not getting the work done, they're dropping the ball, they're not responding. And so it's more of the symptoms that come up that we have to we're doing either written warnings or, PIPs or whatever, like trying to help people improve. But the ultimate problem, is that their workload is either unmanageable or they personally just aren't able to manage the workload that they have for whatever, personal reasons that they're having in their life, and they have additional stress at home, which causes, them to not be able to manage the additional stress at work or even just the regular stress at work. And so that's usually what we're seeing is people having, just multiple areas of stress. And if you're stressed at home and stressed at work, you have like no outlet, and vice versa kind of thing. So a lot of times people just aren't able to leave their personal life at the door and they bring it with them to work. So it's not necessarily just work burnout too, but it can be all kinds of aspects of their life. So the issues is how they're managing stress, but the output of that is usually just all we can do is manage the symptoms and things like that, and until there's actual business solutions to solve what's causing the problem.
So you mentioned PIPs, and since my
Mhm.
wife is in HR, I'm
Mhm.
assuming you mean performance improvement plan.
Yes.
Okay. Um, what typically goes into something like that that can deal with an employee that's, burned out? Like, how do you like, do you reassign some of the problem clients, or like what things typically fall into that?
Yeah, so especially if we can have conversations with the employee before it really does get to a point that it's an individual issue. If there's conversations about like essentially you start talking about the performance problems, like you dropped these balls, like you weren't answering these things, like here's a whole list of things you've done wrong, and we need to talk about why you've been doing these things incorrectly or not doing them at all. And if you're able to have that, open dialogue with the employee a lot of times and they're honest about it, they can talk about, they're just not able to handle the workload. And rather than think of it as a them problem and you take it on as a company problem and you start figuring out, do you need to reassign it? Are some of them like so overwhelmed, like which parts of the work is overwhelming and not letting them get the work done? And so if you can kind of handle it from that perspective, if it is something where you think it's a manageable workload and they are just not getting it done, it really is a them problem. Then obviously in more of a performance improvement plan or a PIP or whatever, a lot of times it's still structured, and we start talking about what can they do to physically improve, and those improvements are outlined, and there's a measurable outcome of what you need to see them improve on. And then obviously if there's no improvement, then there's whatever retributions there is for it. But one thing I would just caution is from HR side, I tend to not put a timeline on it, because if you specifically say 1 month and then they screw up again, you kind of have to kind of start over again in 2 months or whatever. So rather than putting any time on it, just put it more of as strict outcomes, and you're looking for the behavioral change out of them. And if you don't see that behavioral change in whatever time you need them to, you can then take action to change, either terminate them or whatever it is you need to do, depending on how bad the situations can get. And, a lot of times it comes down to, just making sure that they're aware of the problems, but also they might need, they might not actually need resources to get the job done, or transfer the workload and things like that. So
Why not?
I think it comes down to
I'd say maybe,
communication.
I'd say maybe like define the timeline, but don't define the outcome of what's going to happen if they don't hit the goal. Um, just because
The,
I had an employee that, so I did the SMART goal thing,
mhm,
and so it was time based, and I got to the fourth performance review in a row where they hadn't hit it,
mhm,
but in all the other ones I kept finding an excuse as to why the time wasn't met. But
mhm.
because I had it in there and I had four of them, I was like, okay, why is this person still here? Like, I had to ask myself that question. Like, by the third time around, we had made it so clear and so easy and set the bar so low that there was no reason for them not to hit it. And so then when we got there, we both knew like that was it. So
Yeah, the only caution about a timeline is it, from a legal perspective, can kind of put you in a sticky situation if you say, I need you to improve this in 30 days, but in 2 weeks, you're like, this is, it's just, there's grave mistakes. And then you end up just needing to
oh,
fire them right away. You can't, they may have a leg to stand on for wrongful termination because you have it in writing that you were giving them 30 days to improve. So that's why I say, like, from the attorneys that I've worked with, they caution putting times to things versus actual outputs, and gives you more freedom and more control over the situation.
okay. Makes a lot of sense. Makes sense outside of New York and California, probably.
Right?
Yeah.
Uh,
Michelle, can we talk a little bit about our mindset, our hiring mindset of being a reactionary business versus a proactive business. Because I think that comes into play, significantly if we are thinking about if we're hiring based on us just putting out fires and being reactionary,
Hmm.
then we're never really accomplishing what truly managed services is, and that's being proactive technology management.
Hmm.
Um, so what does it take? What do we need to do to shift our mindset and for us to be focused on the proactive side and hiring on the proactive side?
Um, so I would say it comes down to making sure that as the business owner, you know what, I mean, because I am not a techie person. I am not going to pretend that I know how to answer that from a
Yeah.
tech perspective. But you have to, I also had to shift my mindset from, knowing what I know how to do, like HR, versus running a business and knowing how to design the business and the procedures of that and the expectations of the people and be able to work on the business, not in the business. And so there's a certain point that you, as a business owner, have to physically like flip your brain. It honestly took me a couple years to get there. And making sure that I knew how to design and improve the business and the processes of the business. And when you're working with, it can be a couple things can cause you to end up in a reactive situation instead of a proactive control situation, taking on more work than you can handle, which most of us don't like to say no to work or strategically say no to work. That's even a better situation. But if you are in a kind of a point where you can like grow and stabilize and grow and stabilize and kind of have a stair step and not a complete like incline on your growth pattern, you can grow strategically should your intent be to grow or get you to a point where you're happy, because a lot of times with the MSPs that I talk to, they are small intentionally, like they really don't want to get past more than like 5 people, and or sometimes no more than like 10, because they just really don't want to handle the workload or the clientele or the liability that comes with becoming some of the massive companies. So it really depends on your growth goals and making sure that you're reaching those goals, and then making sure you can manage the workload that you have, and then being strategic about when to hire the next person without obviously overloading. And if you're overloading, you'll end up just in a situation where you're doing nothing but putting out fires. And so I typically it's helpful to pipeline when you're recruiting so that you are just kind of putting out feelers. You already have an idea of what kind of person you're looking for. So you can kind of like take time recruiting. So I don't want to say like you don't have to always be recruiting, but if you kind of see things coming a mile away, you're like, well, let me just go ahead and see what kind of people are out there. And it's if you're open and honest about that with the recruiters or with the people that you are recruiting, you can kind of just let them know your timing of things and what's their timing for a job, and if they need to put in a resignation and things like that. It's versus you don't want to drag things out and ghost your people. That kind of sucks too and can damage your reputation. But if you're open, and again, I think it's always about communication, but if you're open and honest about it, you can very easily pipeline so that when you are ready, you have the ability to kind of just bring people back, and
Yeah.
or kind of keep them communication open, from earlier recruiting efforts and things like that. That's typically what agencies do. That's why they can have candidates ready for you to talk to right away if you go with a recruiting agency, because they are always pipelining and knowing what's out there, and they keep their candidate pool kind of available. And you can technically do that for yourself and your own culture. So I feel like there's ways to set yourself up for success to proactively manage your workload in your business. And if you're but it takes, kind of leading the business and not getting caught up in the weeds yourself, which can be a difficult thing to do depending on how you're managing,
Yeah.
the
And
clientele and things like
I
that.
think what you're saying makes total sense. I mean, just like we're, building our funnel from client perspective, we need to be focusing on our hiring funnel. Hopefully, we're not in that need, as frequent as we are on wanting to bring on new clients. But networking, staying in contact with potential employees it makes a world of a difference. Because, you might find someone that you're like, I would love to have this person in my business, but they're not ready to make a move. Well, as you develop that relationship, maybe 6 months from now, a year from now, whatever the case may be, something's changed where they are ready to make a move, and because you've developed that relationship, you might be the first person that they come to.
Right. And then also being the type of company that people are drawn to and they ask you to, they ask you to work for you, is always a good place to be as well. And that comes through networking and developing relationships with people. I myself did that with someone that was an HR professional. I met her networking. She was a spouse of a military rep. So she had always had to start over and get new jobs every time they'd relocate. So she had, to start over every 2-3 years and never really progressed into, an HR leader because she was always, middle HR generalist type person. But I continued to speak with her for probably a year and a half before
Mm.
I could finally get her to work for me. And so
Yeah.
every time I had an opening, I would reach out to her and, she was always not ready. And then, when she finally was ready, she reached out and we made a space for her. And again, really had to slowly ramp her up because I just didn't have the work for her at the time. And we kind of worked our way up and now she's probably closer to full time. She still ebbs and flows. So it's kind of things like that where it can take a long time, but if you've got really good talent, fighting for good talent is obviously difficult, especially in the tech space. You're fighting against a lot of really, big tech companies, well-known names, sometimes with higher paying salaries or better benefits and things like that. So making it about your culture and what you can offer them is a lot of times more important to them than the money. Certain times people will sell their soul for monies for a little while, and then they realize that's not glamorous, and they don't want to do it anymore, and they'll work for people with business ethics and what's more important to them, and making sure that they do have the right culture and fit that they're looking for.
Yeah. Mike, did you have a question? I saw you come off of a mute.
Um, so going back going back to what you were saying earlier in the call about the burnout stuff that you went through with your staff, do you think now that your business has evolved and you've got more processes in place than when you were starting out, that's gotten better? Because I feel like that's the way it is for me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, the more that, your business is in a trial by fire type of mindset, you don't have policies, procedures, you don't have that operational maturity, then it becomes more chaotic where people feel like, you're flying by the seat of your pants. And if the team feels like, because let's face it, a team is only as good as its leader. So if the leader of the organization has that impression that they're flying by the seat of their pants, then the team is going to have some concerning vibes. And so yeah, absolutely. I think as operational maturity grew, also our own maturity too in running a managed services business. I'm sure, Mike, you've experienced this yourself over the time that you know you have a higher level of confidence in doing what you do based on each year that goes by. And so that vibe carries over to your staff, and they see that, and they see the confidence that you have, and that just provides huge value to them.
Yeah, I myself thinking about the employees I've had, I only had one that um quit because they were stressed out, but um he lasted 4 days and came in on Friday and then said, I can't do it. It's like
Yeah.
you're done. And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, you haven't even taken a single phone call yet. We did mock phone calls yesterday as part of your
Right.
training.
Yeah.
And so long story short, he wasn't right for the business to begin with.
At
But
least you found out quick.
yeah, that's the thing. But I thought it was a dicey one going into it because he didn't even drive. He had a phobia of driving.
Oh my.
And so I'm like, but I looked at his resume and stuff, and I'm like, he was he came out of our local vocational school, so he had that background, those skills there. And I'm like, there's only a couple places in our town where he could actually work that he could walk or bike to, and I'm one of them. So I'm like, this could be a good fit. I wouldn't have to worry about him going to work somewhere else and
Yeah. Yeah.
that kind of stuff. But um, yeah, the rest of them though, like I definitely had some clients that if I didn't deal with them, then that would have stressed the employees. I mean, and then I dealt with a client, and they're no longer a client. So.
Well, I think the other thing too, related to unrelated to what, you're talking about, Mike, is that, if we have someone on our team that, we know that if I hand it over to them, they're the ones that are just going to get taken care of, and we're constantly giving them those problems. Um, they're going to be like, they're going to feel stressed. They're going to be like, you know, maybe in the beginning they're like, hey, this is great. Obviously, Mike knows that I can handle it, so he's giving it to me. But every single time, then all of a sudden they're feeling like, okay, why is it always come to me versus, splitting it up and giving it to others and giving the others the ability to grow and be that same person. And I'm not saying that's what your situation is, but I'm just using that as just kind of an example as far as kind of splitting up that workload. Um,
But part of it, I think, is right out of the gate. Like when I go to our local high school and talk about careers in IT, I tell them, if you like solving problems, then yeah, this could be a good career for you because you will get problem after problem to solve all day long. And so if you're the type of person that buys a Sudoku book because it's loaded with problems to solve and spend your own money on it and then sit there and spend the time to do it, then this could be good for you because you'll
right.
get handed problems and it's rewarding when you solve a challenging problem and there you go. But if you like um, helping people or something like that, if the highlight of your days when somebody says thank you or something like go into nursing or something because you're not going to get a lot of that here. Um,
Right.
So I think it's screening right out of the gate that matters.
Yeah, and I think just like we're eager to bring on a new client that might not, just because there's money there, that can happen too in the hiring process, right? Because sometimes you're like, oh, they're close, but not close enough. But that one little thing that they're not close enough on could make the whole relationship and, their ability just go down the drain. And, so we got to be brutally honest with ourselves and say, you know what, this person's just not a fit. Let's not try to force them into being a fit when they're not, just because we're like pulling our hair out, we're at our wits' end, and we're like, I need to add this person right now. Better to be without
Yeah.
than to be with. That's not good. Go ahead, Michelle.
Oh yeah, I wanted to show you like a tool that kind of literally tells you if the person looks to be a fit or not. So this is predictive index with a job match criteria set up. So the orangish color is the job target and the range of the type of behavioral output of workload that's needed. This is for a payroll specialist, but essentially, like the blue lines is where this person literally falls on the predictive index scale, and the middle area here is the median. So when you kind of cross over to this side, this is, we want someone more reserved. They are more social, so it kind of puts them out of alignment. They're in line for being collaborative and steady, but they're on the other side of flexible versus precise. So this is, kind of showing that from the top job target that we've set up versus the behavioral assessment that we need out of them, they're not a fit. And I'll kind of show you, I can probably back up a little bit and show you like the whole list of people that'll let me get
For the
back there.
flexible,
Um,
precise thing, what do you like? Precise, I would think is,
so
they pay
for,
attention to
right,
detail. Flexible means they just wing it and don't pay attention to detail.
yes. So like if you're thinking someone that you want someone that is going to be the type of person to create the policies and procedures, more of a someone that needs to be not so rigid with the rules. They can kind of make up the rules as they go. A lot of times that can be more management depending on what you're actually looking for them. This one, with it being payroll, we need them obviously extremely precise, and we need them, to follow rules and processes and procedures, not be the type of person to say, your process and procedures are broken. We need you to start making new solutions. That's someone that's a little more flexible, that is going to be outside of the box thinker. So this is kind of thing where it says cautionary fit, that they just don't fit into the right role versus a really strong fit and
And what do
things
they
like
have
that.
to
So they
take
kind
some
of,
kind of test to get classified in
it's
there?
an assessment, yeah. So it asks them, questions about how they see themselves, how they show up at work, and then there's an assessment as the employer that you take to say, I need this person's output to look like this. This is the type of job, and this is the tasks that are performed in this job to set this up. I actually like using predictive index because it's very fast in setting up. And I actually wrote a research paper on it when I was getting my degree because I wanted to dive into it a little more, so I just use it as an excuse to write a paper. So it is very valid as far as like the science behind it. Predictive index is one of the older and longest running assessments. It's been around for over 100 years. So they have a lot of research, and now they've obviously made it more contemporary. So this is one where it kind of just tells you what kind of fit they are. And so when we're talking about job match, it's like you can figure out how they are fitting in the role and that kind of stuff. And if they're a strong fit, and if they're not a fit, it may be someone, like you said, you looked at their resume, you thought they'd be a good fit. It can kind of just walk you through. Let me click on this person again. Um, it can walk through like what to ask them if they're not a fit. So since they're not a fit, it'll literally ask you about behavioral questions and things like that to kind of get them to talk more about situations, and you can guide your way through it. So there's tools out there that can help you kind of like scientifically look at it from a job fit perspective.
Are the
And
questions like disguised or anything so they don't know the obvious answer? Like, do you try and up to work on time? Who's going to say
no,
no
it's
to
this one.
that,
It's these are
right?
the no these yeah, no, these are the questions. Let's see. So it's like, how do you make sure that you've gathered all the facts before communicating to project stakeholders? Describe a job where you encountered a lot of interruptions and how you managed to get your work done. So,
So you
So at what, oh, go ahead, Dan.
no, go ahead, Mike. Go ahead.
So at what point in the process do you send them this quiz to take?
so because predictive index is affordable, we have kind of unlimited amount to use on them. We ask them to take it pretty early. So they usually, like, once they've applied, we can either have them do it right after they've applied, or we can have them do like a phone screen or something first and then take it. It depends on where in the process we want to start adding loopholes, like that they have to keep jumping over, like whatever, like what do they have to
Yeah,
do to get the job? Candidates obviously only have so much patience and attention span.
that's
So
what I
we kind of
found
take that into
out.
consideration.
At one point I used Indeed, and the feedback I got from some people, not even that were interviewing for the job that I had, but that had used Indeed themselves, they said they hated when they had to do those quizzes on stuff. And
Yeah, this one is very simple. It takes less than 5 minutes to complete, which is why I wrote a research paper on it. I think that their assessment lacks something called face validity. It doesn't look like it's going to measure what it measures. However, the rest of it is extraordinarily valid and very, very close to like the truth. So I'll show you like job fit and kind of what happens out of this. It kind of tells you like that's the job information. I'm trying to find
Well, guys,
Here we go. Maybe
Michelle
it's maybe
just
about.
admitted that she is truly an HR geek, that she used something as an excuse to write a report on this. I love it.
So, I mean, I had to do it for my doctoral research anyway.
Yeah.
So this kind of, are you guys seeing the screen? Am I still sharing my screen? Is it
Yes.
sharing
Yes.
right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. So this kind of says like it kind of tells you about the person and it breaks it down to their preferred work style and whether or not you think that's what you need in your environment. So this person's preferred work style is unhurried, deliberate, stable, will do things using established processes, finds it difficult to change these systems. So if I'm going to put them in a situation where they're doing nothing but using different systems with different clients and everything, this is a payroll, which is obviously like we do like 15 different payrolls, and if someone goes out, we need someone else to follow the SOPs to process that payroll in a system they've probably never touched before. So this would be a very bad fit for like, I'd be like, well, I need you to be hurried and I need you to be in difficult changing systems all the time. And so this is kind of where it's like, if you can tell this about a person, um, then maybe you can catch them before, you're going to put them outside their comfort zone. So this kind of measures someone's natural disposition. And then if they say, well, I really want the job, and you kind of decide to hire them anyway, they can only work against their natural disposition for so long before they get stressed and burned out. So, they may think that this is a career that they want, and they may just not be the type of person to handle it. So,
Or when they get really stressed, they revert to their natural behavior.
exactly.
What
Yeah.
about using like this compared to like disk? We
So,
disk a
go
lot
ahead.
in the past.
So, DISC isn't validated for hiring purposes. It's validated for a communication tool.
Okay.
So it's meant to if you were to want to use it as like, it's also a very long assessment to take.
Yeah.
Um it's a very in-depth thing, and it's also expensive. So you can use it if you want to make sure that you understand their communication style, how they're going to communicate with the team, and that kind of thing too. When you understand that from them, this is literally meant to be used as a hiring tool.
Okay.
You can use it for team environments. You can use it to learn how they're going to fit inside the team, but it's not the best tool for that.
The
Okay.
disc, like if you'd already hired him and then you were trying to figure out, is this a person where I have to give them all the details to digest
Mhm.
before we meet?
Mhm.
Or can I just invite them to a meeting where they haven't even seen the agenda before they show up? The disc
Right.
is real helpful at determining where they're going to fall on that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. We only have a couple more minutes left here. Unless anybody has any questions, I would. Does anybody have any questions? Let me start there.
I was just kind of curious for Michelle, what are your goals as to what staff size you want to get to, or is that not one of your goals?
That's an interesting question because I have like revenue goals, and it's easier to meet those revenue goals with full-time people, but it's
Mhm.
really hard for me to like staff full-time people being in a fractional environment.
Yeah.
So if I were to like completely double, I'd go from like 40 team members to 80 team members. And, I don't know if I want that type of like staffing and
Yeah.
that kind of stuff too. So, I think for me, it's kind of just been kind of scaling and revenue and then adding people. I haven't looked at it from like I'm, which is crazy because I'm a seven-figure business, and it's not one where I've taken a business plan and said I'm going to go meet these business plan goals. I've really just kind of had loose goals, and kind of wanted to make sure that we are providing the services we can, and we kind of bring in new clients, and I get to be picky now about which clients I work with. So I think a lot of it now is really bringing value to the clients, and then also value to the employees' lives, that I get to help them live lives that they want to live. So I've been focusing on those goals and then kind of seeing where the money follows behind that.
Well, and 80 is a whole different animal than 40.
That is a whole different animal.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's like it's also 2 million versus or 2.5 million versus like 5 million. So it's a big difference
Yeah,
there
because
too.
once you go over 50 employees, well, in New York State anyways, that you're in, you have way more things you have to comply with.
Right.
Mhm.
And
Yep.
so, yeah, my wife is in HR, and when I was starting the business, she said, "Don't hire any employees. Employees are nothing but trouble." I was like,
Keep them
"Oh,
as contractors if you can, legally.
that's not my plan." So, yeah,
Like I've said before, you know, business would be great if it wasn't for employees. Then the other saying is business
Indeed.
would be great if it wasn't for clients.
I,
But we
I've
can't
said
survive
for
without either of
years,
them.
clients are the obstacle to profits.
Right.
I
So
thought that was
one,
the sales prevention department. I mean, finance.
yeah. So one last thing from you, Michelle. If there's one thing that our audience can do this week to take stress off of their team, what is that?
Oh goodness. I have no, I mean, to one thing, and I don't know if this would be to take stress off their plate, but I would say to make sure that you are understanding their frame of mind and their stress level. So I would say make sure that they feel heard. That's probably the easiest thing you could do quickly is to make sure you're having conversations and understanding how they feel so that you know how to act and grow
Yeah.
and change.
I like that. You know, especially like, you know, the other component is just understanding their stress level because it's easy to do. I mean, we all do it, but I think we have to be a little bit more genuine and conscientious of it. And
Mm.
great. That's awesome. Michelle, thank you as always. A lot of great information. Thank you for your time. I did throw Michelle's LinkedIn contact into the chat. So if you have not connected with Michelle, please do. Griffin Resources is available for HR services. So if you are in need of any kind of support that Michelle provides, Michelle and her team, give her your consideration. So, all right. Thank you, everybody. Until next time, we'll talk to you guys later. Have a great
See
day.
you later.
See you later.
Bye.